TopMedTalk.
Well, hello, welcome to TopMedTalk. I'm Andy Cumpsty, and I'm your host today, and I'm grateful to be joined by Joff Lacey, my co-host, and we're both here at the Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine, or EBPOM, World Congress in London, and it's day 2 of the conference, Joff, and it's busy as always.
It is, as always. There's lots going on. Workshops this morning and some great sessions this afternoon as well. So yeah, great day to follow on from yesterday.
And again, there's a really good buzz around. We keep talking about it, but it's a really good atmosphere. Lots of people here, back first time face-to-face with some of them.
Absolutely. It's international, multidisciplinary crowd, lots of chat in the breaks in between sessions, and it's always fun and interesting to be here.
Absolutely. Speaking of fun and interesting, we've got a fan fave with us here back on TopMedTalk. A voice is well known to many of us. Welcome back, Lee. Why don't you introduce yourselves to people that haven't heard you before?
Sure. It's Lee Fleischer. It's such a pleasure to be back here and be with TopMedTalk. It's been so many years that I've had the privilege of working with all of you and participating. I was the former chair of anesthesiology at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm now professor emeritus. I spent 3 years in the U.S. government as the chief medical officer and director of the Center for Clinical Standards at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So, large regulatory agency, which is actually something I'd love to talk about today.
Fantastic. Why don't we start there then? That'd be great. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And just this past Friday, so the 28th of June in JAMA Health Forum, I published a viewpoint with a colleague of mine from Duke on how we should regulate artificial intelligence, or AI, at the point of care.
Interesting.
It really has become an issue. AI, everyone talked about, should be a back-end issue. It should be, how do we do bills? How do we decide what patients should get what treatment from an insurance perspective in the United States? But it is moving fast. I mean, we're already seeing clinical decision support systems in some of the devices we're talking about here.
Yeah, around the room with us now as well, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and very much, though, just, support decisions, but obviously, as I'm sure you're kind of leaning towards, as people have described with AI in general, there is the concern about slippery slopes with these things. So is that something that concerns you?
Absolutely. I'm a Bayesian decision analyst. That's what I spend most of my career studying. And this idea of we come into the room with our prior beliefs, and then we get data and we make a decision, and then we act on that decision. So people have to understand where we're starting, the robustness of that decision, a diagnostic test, all my work on preoperative testing, and what we should do with the information. With AI, it's been really interesting. The more you read, you see in the radiology arena, you could get the AI to read the X-ray. You could get a human to read the X-ray. They'll do pretty well, both of them. You'll put it together, and many times it'll get worse because we have not been trained to understand how to use the output of AI, which also depends on what the input to the algorithms are, which we talk a lot about. I just finished a Master's of Law, and as part of that, I took an AI course, and they always talked about the global north, that most of the data comes from Europe, North America, it comes from China, a lot of it, that we use for our algorithms, but that may not be the patient population we're using it on.
So you're saying that the humans incorporating AI into their decision-making could make their decision-making worse? Is that what you're... There's evidence that can happen, yeah.
There is evidence because what happens is if they find the AI is wrong, and we're not even talking about generative AI, we're talking about the stuff we all grew up with, risk indices that were predictive models, but we don't know the inputs, that people will start questioning the AI and may not understand that it's not perfect, depending on the algorithms. It also, people may fight the decisions and not incorporate it into the way they make decisions. in the States, President Biden, actually, when I was still in the government, put out an executive order on safe and effective AI. And they talk about FAVES: fair, accurate, verifiable, equitable, and safe. So there's a lot of groups saying, what does safe mean? How should we incorporate it into what we do? And again, in the States, there's something called interoperability, that electronic health records need to talk to each other. And there is a new rule that says that anything that interfaces with the electronic health record has to be really transparent about the data sets that were used to build the AI and whether you can apply it to the individual in front of you.
So putting that one step further then, how do we, if we're concerned that AI is not always accurate, but we're concerned that using it may make our decision-making worse, that leaves us in a very difficult position, doesn't it? How do you balance the information the AI is giving you if you don't know how to trust it?
So I think there's two things. Number one, it actually will improve decision-making if used correctly. I mean, this is the power to detect rare diseases, huge. The power to alert us that there are trends that may denote something bad, really important. So I think there's a couple things. One is, I think companies need to really think about when they put out their AI, what are the indications for use? Who should this be used on? And how do we train the clinicians about how it should be used? Number two, and this is really the basis of my article. So in the States, the role I had oversaw hospitals and health systems, what we would call the conditions of participation or safe and healthy regulations. I don't know what it is in the UK, but do you have a similar thing? It's the Joint Commission. My position oversaw the Joint Commission in the United States. Is there a body that says if your hospital has a error, somebody comes in and sees if you corrected appropriately?
Yeah, I guess it's probably the CQC, our nearest equivalent.
Commission,
Yeah.
Okay, so what I suggested is, as part of those rules in which they take federal money, that hospitals really need to develop policies and procedures of who can use it. Just because I could use AI to give chemotherapy, you got to be crazy to let me give chemotherapy.
Yeah.
That's not what trained does. So who is allowed to use the AI? Who is properly trained? Just like if you're using a new machine, I assume in my institution, I have to be trained on it and sign off.
Absolutely, yeah. That'll be the same here in the UK. Yeah.
So if they don't and they have an error occurs and there's a safety event, I think we need to have policies and procedures to ask ourselves, is that the AI has a problem? It's a bad algorithm. And do you feed that back to the manufacturer of the AI, the developer of the AI? If it's that the AI is correct, but you applied it to the wrong population, is that a manufacturer error in that they didn't tell you who you should use this on? Or is it that the hospital or health system or clinic, etc., did not properly define those safeguards? And if it's the latter, then my article for the states is that the Joint Commission, the DNV, which is another accrediting organization, state surveys, or CMS itself, should come in and give it a citation, the hospital, and say, you must fix your policies and procedures. They're not going to be the experts in whether the AI is right, and there may need to be a body in between that really says we've tested the algorithms and they're robust. So that's the missing link, whether that in the States is the FDA. But those are sort of the three things. Did the manufacturer, did they get it right? Were they transparent on who it should be used on? Did the hospital, did they get it verified if a body exists? And lastly, did the hospital implement it correctly and train their people to use it correctly?
What organizations or regulators in the States are monitoring those steps at the moment?
So, as I said, I told my former agency that I worked up in up until a year ago that they should do the one at the hospital.
Yeah.
Through either themselves or what they call the accredited organizations, the ones who do it for them. And they should go in and find out what's wrong and cite places that don't do it right. The FDA assesses some devices, software is a medical device, but some of them are just putting algorithms out there and you don't know. So the question really is, will there be, and there's something called the Coalition for Health AI. There's a number of different coalitions. I'm part of what's called CHI, so I want to disclose that. There are others that saying, sort of like a laboratory, if a lab gets tested to see if they're following the directions and they're doing it right. It's in the States, it's called CLIA. It's actually the body that found the Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes. They actually reported to CMS, to my position, that they're the body that something like that, which would say this laboratory tested it against their data sets and the algorithm was robust. But we don't have that now.
And that would need to move reasonably swiftly because, AI is very much here and will increasingly be here. So we need to set up those regulatory procedures now, really, or yesterday.
The other question, and somebody suggested this after the discussion about the Montgomery decision and shared decision-making yesterday is, will the courts regulate this here in the States? If you don't tell your patient that how much do you need to be informed by the AI? How much do you need to tell the patient that it's AI that's helping in your diagnosis?
And I guess with that regulation becomes a degree of credibility as well, doesn't it? So if you're using an AI system as a user, how do you know whether you can trust that AI equipment or device or process or not? You want that regulation to be in place, but what sort of signs would you see as a user in a hospital, whether that system has been regulated appropriately or whether it's just been brought in through the sidelines? How would you know?
It's an interesting question. Should it be official, or in the States there's, I don't know if you know of it, the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval.
Okay.
There are laboratories, UL, that are voluntary.
Right.
But it makes you feel better because it's been approved by some voluntary group like Good Housekeeping or UL or one of those. So the question is, will this, I don't know if we can make it mandatory fast enough, but maybe these labs will pop up in academic centers. The question is, who should control the labs? Is it Google, Microsoft, Apple? Is it UCL, Southampton, Mayo Clinic? Or should they be independent? Really complicated.
Yeah, really complicated.
There's not an easy answer to any of those, is there?
The bottom line, I think, is we are in an exciting time. We can see trends. It can help us take better care of patients, but we, the community, need to ask the right questions. And we should demand of our manufacturers that they're transparent, they give us good instructions for use, and if these labs do get developed, they actually get them verified.
And so looking forward then ahead over the immediate, medium and long-term future, then where do we see this progressing? Because as we've already said, this is a rapidly changing field. It's changing around us almost day by day. It's quite hard to keep up with in some ways. How do people not get left behind with that? And two, what should they be looking out for in the next short-term and medium-term future for this process?
It's interesting because if this was a few years ago, I would say the EU has their AI code of conduct. The United States is developing it quickly. I don't know where Britain is, and because I've read a lot of the EU code of conduct, but they're actually talking about the different levels of risk. And I think that's important. You need to decide what risk tolerance. My fear is not
You mean as in particular areas where is our threshold?
right
Yeah. Okay.
of accepting.
And healthcare, that would that's the highest risk, surely.
And the question really isn't whether, Southampton, who I'm sure you have computer scientists.
We do, absolutely, yeah. But in terms of...
Including, I think I'm looking at one, right? Machine learning.
I do a little bit, but I definitely wouldn't call myself an expert at it. But we've got teams working on this sort of work. We've got research in this area in Southampton, and watching that field grow around us, it's a fascinating field because it is changing so rapidly that, the regulation we're talking about, but also the usability, all of that, it's almost changing in front of your face when you're trying to do the work in the system. You start a project and it's almost out of date before you've finished it.
But Andy, you being at Southampton and knowing the colleagues to call, you will make sure something is implemented well. But think of the county hospitals. Think of the places not attached to a university.
Well, that was my question. How do they follow that process? Because it feels like a bit like a minefield.
Well,
you've got contacts.
It has to be
colleagues.
A nationally joined up thinking process, doesn't it? Has to be.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't require something to go wrong to prompt that there's a bit of a preemptive joined up thinking. But
20 years ago when I joined the department as the chair, they actually were working on a sepsis sniffer. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but Epic, which is one of the big electronic health records in the States, and I don't know if it's over here too.
This is over here, yeah.
Okay. They implemented it. So we started seeing problems because the more sensitive the algorithm got, the less specific.
Yeah.
And people started to ignoring it because 3 days in advance, they said you have a 27% chance of sepsis, be on alert. And they got tired of it not being as specific.
Yeah, almost the alarm fatigue in ICU with them all going off. Which one do you look at? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you actually now know that Epic put out a sepsis algorithm that they had to pull back because it actually had some inaccuracies. And, in the States, there was a very famous Overguard did this wonderful trial or study in which they put out an algorithm that said, getting back to the inequities that we talked about yesterday, we are going to predict who needs more resources. And we're going to go on historical data of who had the highest spend. And those who had low spend, we're not going to need more resources for them. But if you think, you and I, when we have a minor problem, are going to access the entire health system. At least I will. I'm in my 60s now, so I'll take, I'll take credit for that I will be a higher spender. But those in economically disadvantaged areas, and we heard about Australia, we heard about different parts of England and the UK, they're using less. So the algorithm actually created more problems because they gave even less resources to those who needed the most.
Nice.
Because they weren't spending as much. So when we create these algorithms, that's what we have to think about.
But that's as much a policymaker's role to impact that as our role as individual clinician, isn't it?
The policymaker says you can't do that anymore, and they're starting to in the U.S. And we need to understand and be able to show whether or not we should use these algorithms.
Yeah. So which of the algorithms to focus on first, or are there any things to watch?
I think the best thing we can do is not use the generative algorithms, use the ones that are fixed. We need to ask lots of questions about the reliability, the validity, the data set, and we need to understand what happens if we get that alert on our monitor. How should we interpret it, and how do we train our trainees and ourselves to use it more wisely?
Fantastic. I think that's a great note to finish on. Thanks again for your time, Lee. Great to have you here on TopMedTalk again. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Joff.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening back at home. As always, you can hear this talk and all our other conversations on our app, on our website, or on your podcasting platform of choice. Find us on all our social medias, and please hit that like and subscribe button. And we'll see you again soon.
TopMedTalk. Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe, check us out on YouTube, and of course on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook and X. Also, it's important to remember that TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is ebpom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. ebpom.org.